how do you write a god? More specifically, how do you make a god interesting and believable as a main character? This is one of the most difficult challenges the MCU has faced since it released the first Thor film all the way back in 2011. Since then, Marvel's approach to this issue, and the character as a whole, has varied wildly from one movie to the next. So, after 5 directors and 8 on-screen appearances, which iteration of the character actually works the best? Today, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the evolution of Thor in the MCU, how effectively he's utilized in each film, and determining where the character should go from here. I'm Dylan, and this is The Writer's Block. When I started my rewatch of the Thor movies, I was immediately caught off guard. The common consensus on the internet is that Thor Ragnarok was when they finally figured out how to write Thor, and everything before that was a bit of a mess. However, I was surprised to see just how much of current Thor's DNA could be found in his debut film. Directed by Kenneth Branagh, who is known for starring and directing in films like Hamlet, Thor 1 unsurprisingly contains a great deal of Shakespearean influences. The Norse gods are treated much like figures in Arthurian legend, and the story as a whole plays out a lot like Prodigal Son meets Sword in the Stone. The central conceit of the narrative is that Thor, played by Chris Hemsworth, is a
vain, greedy, cruel boy
who is unfit to rule. After he knowingly disobeys his father's orders, Thor is cast out by Odin, and is unable to come back until his hammer Mjolnir,
Jonathan,
deems him worthy. Once on Earth, he meets astrophysicist Jane Foster, who attempts to understand the physics of how Thor arrived on their planet. The two bond while Loki is off in Asgard causing problems. Thor fails to lift Mjolnir. Loki sends a big robot to kill Thor. Thor decides he's willing to die to protect those he loves. Mjolnir says, "Sweet dude, you're worthy now." Thor defeats the Destroyer, goes back to Asgard to stop Loki, the Bifrost is destroyed, the end. It's a weird movie, and there's a lot you could critique, especially in Act 2, but overall, I'm really impressed by Thor 1. Hemsworth and Natalie Portman are a delight to watch. The world building is super impressive for only being the MCU's 4th film, and most importantly, the theme and character arcs are well executed. Though it's not terribly original, the concept that Thor needs to mature in order to bear the weight of leadership serves as one of the main through lines for his character. The growth that we will see in the next 7 movies all starts with this initial film. Additionally, the other major element that is established here is Thor's relationship with his adopted brother Loki. Their strained love-hate relationship is a key component of all the Thor films, and right off the bat, the audience longs for them to reconcile. Of course, Loki's chaotic nature and jealousy makes this incredibly unlikely, which leads us into
Revenges.
The real test of Marvel's interconnected universe was the first Avengers, not to be confused with the first Avenger. It had to accomplish a lot in order to work. In addition to fitting 6 superheroes and Samuel L. Jackson into one film, it also had to find a way to make the God of Thunder mesh with the somewhat grounded nature of the MCU's Earth. By making Loki the villain, Thor was given the responsibility of explaining Asgard and magic to the rest of the team. Avengers in some ways serves as an epilogue to Thor 1 in terms of the brothers' relationship, but overall, we don't see much growth out of Thor specifically. Then came
the dark times.
Thor: The Dark World is generally seen as one of the least enjoyable movies in the MCU, and while there are elements I appreciate, I don't disagree with this assessment. The Dark World begins with a fascinating look at the politics of Asgard and Thor's quest to pacify the 9 realms, but quickly devolves into generic bad guys fighting over a generic MacGuffin. If they leaned more into Thor's relationship with Jane, Loki, and his parents, and took a more granular look at what it means to be heir to the throne, I think the film could have flourished. It's not necessarily a bad film, but it's forgettable, which is arguably even worse. The key takeaways are that Thor is sad because he thinks Loki is dead, he's going to try to make his relationship with Jane work, and the red gloopy stuff is an Infinity Stone, which will be really important half a decade from now. Next, we have Age of Ultron, which is arguably the lowest quality Avengers flick, but that's kinda like being the least famous Hemsworth brother. You're still pretty to look at and make a buttload of money. While the only major moment of growth Thor has is seeing a vision of the approaching Ragnarok, Ultron is chock full of wonderful character beats for the God of Thunder. We really get to see him start to feel comfortable with the rest of the Avengers, and his godliness sets up quite a few humorous gags. What impressed me about Avengers the Squeakquel was that it really seems they figured out how to utilize Thor in a team environment. Aside from just unique powers, his brashness and bravado help set him apart from other big personalities like Tony Stark. He's the type of guy to give a rousing motivational speech before actually having a plan of attack. While director Joss Whedon doesn't do much to progress Thor as an individual, he deftly captures what makes him stand out as part of a team. But if you take that team away, and you strip back what's on the character's surface, what are you left with? Directed by Taika Waititi, Thor Ragnarok marks a major turning point for Marvel's favorite blondie. Many would say it's because of a dramatic shift in Thor's character, but this actually isn't the case. As I stated before, much of what makes the God of Thunder tick was set up early on and still carries over to his third solo outing. Thor's struggle to bear the responsibility of leadership and his relationship with Loki are all present. In fact, Taika makes sure they're front and center. Despite the vibrant pop aesthetic and comedic tone that is present throughout the film, Ragnarok at its core is a story about family and redemption. Thor and Loki learn that Odin was a completely different person before they were born. Their newly discovered sister Hela forces them to pay for the sins of their father. When it comes to Loki, Thor realizes just how difficult it is to love someone even when you know they'll never change. Additionally, Thor is forced to reckon with being the leader of a community that no longer has a home. Ragnarok explores its narrative motifs much more deeply than previous films, but all the themes were set up by the first two movies. With regards to the aesthetic and tone, yes, Ragnarok is in fact a departure. While Thor was a source of comedy in previous iterations, he played the straight man. In this film, Taika encouraged a much more humorous take on the Asgardian hero, which both the actor and audiences seemed to thoroughly enjoy. Thanks to Taika's comedic sensibilities, the heavy and often dark themes of Thor Ragnarok were easy for audiences to digest, which I think is why the film is currently Thor's best reviewed project. The next outing for Thor would be Avengers Infinity War, in which he gets off to a rough start. He's forced to watch the murder of some of his closest friends, and then holds his brother's dead body as he's sucked into the vacuum of space. While this is arguably one of the best openings in a Marvel movie, it's also the only moment of development Thor gets for the rest of the film. Don't get me wrong, Infinity War is a great movie, and Thor is one of the most enjoyable characters in it to watch. I just think, in terms of character development, it's kind of flat. Throughout the runtime, he's really only motivated by revenge, which I get is to set up his arc in Endgame, but it's just a bit one note compared to Ragnarok. Also, one issue I rarely hear talked about is the fact that they immediately get rid of Thor's eye patch. It's a small detail, and I know it's probably easier for the actor, but Thor losing an eye was a big moment. Giving him a replacement not only lowers the impact of consequences, but also undermines the visual symbolism of Thor becoming more like his father. After Groot chops off his own arm to craft Stormbreaker, which is objectively metal as heck, Scotty beams Thor down to Earth, but they forget to turn on aimbot, so Thor misses the headshot and half the population goes poof. And just like that,
We're in the Endgame now.
Endgame fixes pretty much all of my critiques of Thor in Infinity War. We begin by learning that Thanos has destroyed the Infinity Stones, and any hope of reversing the snap along with it. Enraged and in denial, Thor murders Thanos right then and there, simply stating,
I went for that.
I love this beat, specifically because it forces Thor to accept that certain consequences can't be easily reversed. This is the ultimate blow to his hubris. He assumed he could come in and fight his way to a solution, but when he realizes he can't, he enters the self-destructive spiral we soon see. Obviously, he and the Avengers do reverse the snap because it's a Hollywood movie, but the fact that we get to see him overcome with the belief that he experienced ultimate failure immediately puts Endgame as a top-tier Thor story. After the 5-year time jump, we see that Thor is looking just a little bit different. There's certainly an argument to be made that body weight shouldn't be used as visual shorthand for a character's decline, but I do appreciate that they commit to this being how Thor looks for the rest of the film. It serves as a metaphor for Thor's emotional baggage and emphasizes that worthiness is about more than superficial things like appearance. Additionally, the excitement on Thor's face when Cap lifts Mjolnir is a small but key indicator of meaningful growth over time. I don't love that Thor gives up the position of king at the end of the film, seen as it directly reverses the whole point of Ragnarok, but in a vacuum, Thor is absolutely one of the best handled characters in Endgame. Finally, we're left with Thor Love and Thunder. I've only seen it once in theaters, and will be doing a dedicated video on it in the future, but as of right now, it's the Thor film I'm most undecided on. It leans full tilt into the vibrant pop aesthetic introduced in Ragnarok, and aside from maybe Ant-Man, is one of the only straight-up comedies in the MCU. Because of this, some of the more emotional beats feel hard to take seriously due to all of the slapstick humor directly surrounding them. It's by no means a bad movie, and in all likelihood is actually really good, but it just wasn't what I or many Marvel fans expected. In terms of character development for Thor, it's actually really strong, which isn't surprising. If there are two things Taika Waititi understands, it's how to progress Thor's character, and how to overuse the screaming goat gag enough times that it circles back around to being hilarious. Given that Endgame reverses the whole heir to the throne storyline, Taika instead chooses to center the movie on Thor's fear of loss. This manifests in Jane Foster, who is reintroduced into Thor's life, but with the caveat that she's living on borrowed time. The lack of control Thor has over this situation really taps into his trauma from the last film. He must learn to love while also being able to let go. On top of that, by essentially giving Thor a daughter at the end of the movie, Waititi has found an excellent role for the character to grow into over time, especially considering that ruling over the Asgardians isn't an option anymore. So this leaves us with a question. Where do we go from here? Thor Odinson has been one of Marvel's trickiest characters to get right. I think this is because both Marvel Studios and the audience tend to misunderstand him. From the beginning of his tenure in the MCU, Thor has consistently bordered on perfection, but always falls just a bit short. People often overlook how much truly great character work has been there all along, because many of his appearances fail to fully capitalize on it. I think this is the main reason Thor is the only one of the big three that stuck around after Endgame. The utilization of Iron Man and Captain America throughout the franchise has always had a clear direction. Therefore, it was much easier and more poetic to end their stories alongside the Infinity Saga. Thor, however, has only just recently found his narrative footing. Because of this, there's a lot of potential for great stories moving forward. I don't think Taika Waititi or the Russo brothers' interpretations of the character have been perfect, but they really seem to be moving the God of Thunder in the right direction. They're digging deep into the well of emotional nuance that previous directors only scratched the surface of. A fifth Thor movie hasn't been announced yet, so we don't know when exactly we will see the character again. But if interviews are to be believed, Chris Hemsworth is more than happy to reprise the role, and his character is in a great position to serve as a member of the old guard within Phase 4 and whatever this new saga ends up being called.
Jonathan?
I started this project not really all that enthused about Thor. I merely wanted to make sense of people's split opinions on the character and his current utilization. However, after sifting through his filmography and really identifying the elements of the god that works best, I'm shocked to say that Thor has ascended to one of my favorite heroes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Both narratively and in a meta sense, he's had a flawed and inconsistent run, but it's punctuated by redemption and revitalization. And that's the real brilliance of the MCU. The ongoing nature of its story means that its characters can improve, adapt, and evolve over the course of several films. That's why a character like Thor was able to go from one of Marvel's most generic heroes to one of its most complex and beloved icons. If you made it to the end of this video, I sincerely thank you. If you enjoy this type of content, subscribing is one of the most helpful things you can do for a small channel like mine. Additionally, I love nerdy discussions, so be sure to leave a comment about which Marvel character you'd like to see get a Thor-style revamping. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.